All right, welcome Neogenians to Dawn of the New Earth. Today we are talking about Qabalah and the Tree of Life. We've done a brief overview and introduction before, but now we are getting into the gritty details of this, especially the importance of understanding the Tree of Life as a specific pattern, a specific system to be able to communicate with your unconscious mind and forge a link to your higher self and your soul. We're going to be seeing how this all works and why this is so important and what it even actually is. So we're going to get started right away. But as always, make sure that you like and subscribe. It helps get this information out there. This isn't just a channel. This is a revolution of consciousness. When you hit like, subscribe, it helps spread this information around. If you haven't become a member yet, consider becoming a member. Helps out a lot. You get access to my free downloads on inner transformation and alchemy. You get access to our members only videos. We're having a members only video right after this called The Dark Truth About Faith in God. So that's going to be really good. So it helps out a lot. I appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, check out my books. If you like what we talk about, these sort of topics, I recommend my 5th book. It's called Psychogenesis, Self and Universal Transformation. This is all about how to connect with your higher self, reach the highest levels of consciousness, hyper-awareness, and will forming, which is essentially manifestation to live the kind of life that you want to live, okay? So I recommend that one. All right, so let's get right into this. I know I'm talking a little fast because we have a lot to pack into this video. It's going to be good. It's going to be really important. So like I said, we are taking a look at the Tree of Life. And as we take a look at the Tree of Life, first of all, we always have to remember, why are we doing this? Why are we, what's the point here? Because I think that a lot of people can get sort of lost in all the different terminology and symbolism and forget why we're actually doing this. What we are doing, why we are learning this, and I know I said this before, but I'm going to keep emphasizing it because it's so important. We are installing a pattern in our psyche that we can then use to connect with and organize our mind / our soul. It is not an accurate model. It is a useful model. Just like words don't accurately describe something. If I say cat, it doesn't describe the structure of a cat. It's not what a cat, but it's a word that allows us to reference the entity cat. Language allows us to communicate and form concepts. They're not an actual representation of the structure of reality. Likewise, the Tree of Life is like a language for your unconscious, because your unconscious doesn't communicate in words, it communicates in symbols. And so when we are forging this symbolic network, we are allowing ourselves to communicate from our unconscious. This is like dreaming in reverse. When you dream, your unconscious gives you symbols to interpret. We're sort of reversing it here, where we are learning symbols to place in our consciousness to communicate with our unconscious, okay? So that's what it is. It's a structure, a pattern that we're installing in our psyche to be able to organize it and connect and evolve, all right? So that's what it is. So let's get right down to this. Like I said, last time we did a brief overview, but now let's get into the details. Okay, so let me bring this on screen here. So as you can see, this is the diagram we looked at last time. This is the Tree of Life. Don't worry about the paths that are labeled. You don't have to worry about those. We're going to talk about the paths some other time. Today, we are focusing on the Severot or Severot. And as always, I'll give you two different pronunciations. I asked people to leave comments, and almost all of you said you liked both pronunciations. So I'll give you an easy, the easy pronunciation and then the way it's traditionally pronounced. So you can use whichever one that you like. So that's what we looked at last time. We looked at a very brief overview. Now we're going to go even deeper. But here's the thing. You may have seen that I wrote something up here. And this is because before we even get to the Tree of Life itself, okay, before anything exists, before the tree itself, before we can even explore the tree, there's what Qabalah calls the 3 veils of negative existence. And I know that negative existence sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. What it really is just a fancy way of saying that this is stuff beyond existence as we know it. It's like a mystery behind the curtain. That's what it means. So for these 3 veils, For today's video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the three veils and more of a deeper understanding of the tree of life and the Severity. So one thing that I want to say is what we're sort of doing here as well, because I said we're going to do a deeper dive, but Qabalah can be incredibly complex, so it's not going to be exhaustive. So as we go forward today, if some things still feel like this is still kind of vague, don't worry, because every video that we do will go deeper and deeper into it. Basically, remember how I said we're installing a pattern in our psyche? What we want to do right now is install the most generalized version of it. Because what we're going to do then, once we understand the generalized version of it, we can take it and make it more specific and tailor it to very specific processes in the mind. So we are going to explore in more depth, but it's still going to be very general. In the future, we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about these three negative veils here. You can see that, well, you can't really see, but what this says is ein. And ein is the first veil, and ein is the Hebrew word for nothing. It's just absolute, total nothing at all. It's something that we can't even really think about. It's not a thing. It doesn't have any qualities, no mind, no will. It's a blank canvas before the canvas even exists. It's before the Big Bang. It's not even really the singularity. It's just total nothing without any qualities or containing anything. That's the first veil. That is ein. Then you have the second veil, which is called Ein Sof, which essentially means the infinite or the endless. Specifically, Ein Sof means without end. So now we're getting a little closer to there being something, but not quite. This is infinite being. It's still not being, it's still not life or anything like this, but it's essentially infinite potentiality in a certain way. So ein is the concept of nothing. Ein Sof is the concept of endlessness. So then we have the third veil, which is Ein Sof Or. Ein Sof Or is the infinite light. So this is now movement. It's like a flash of lightning. It's sentience. It's the impulse towards awareness. It's the urge to create. It's basically a raw divine energy, a current that's going to pour through the tree of life itself. Okay, so basically you have Ein Sof, Ein Sof Or. Ein Sof Or is the infinite light. And you can think of the infinite light as like the power source that's going to power up the tree of life. Okay, so in the future, we'll go into more detail on that. Just enough to know that what is powering this tree of life is what's known as Ein Sof Or the infinite light. Ein Sof Or. If anyone is familiar with Hegelian philosophy, Hegel's one of my favorite philosophers. If anyone's familiar with Hegel's philosophy, this is basically his concept of nothing, being, and becoming. Real quick, Hegel basically says that, hey, if you think about pure nothingness, it's this and pure being. Ultimately, they're the same thing because nothingness has no content and pure being also has no content. So being and nothing are the same, yet different. And then becoming is the synthesis of being and nothing collapsing into each other, creating essentially movement. So you have the concept of nothingness, the concept of beingness that begins to collapse into each other to form the concept of becoming. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense, doesn't matter really. It's just this concept of divine energy and motion that's going to be flowing through the tree of life. So now let's actually talk about the tree itself. So the divine energy current of the endless lights, Ein Sof Or, the first place it lands is in the first Severity, known as Kether, or the first Sephirot known as Kether. So the first Sephirot known as Kether is called the crown. And it's the first emanation. This is the beginning of existence. Think of it like the divine will to be. It doesn't actually do anything yet. It's pure, undivided intent to do. So if Ein Sof is the light, Kether is essentially the first movement, the first energy center of that light. It's basically the singularity from which everything is going to unfold. It's beyond personality, beyond anything like this, that this is unity, stillness. Well, I wouldn't say stillness because it does involve motion, but I mean in terms of it being perfect. It is unity, it is perfection. It's the seed of everything. Every possibility is contained here. It's like the divine egg. Nothing has hatched yet, but it contains everything that is going to emerge. Ultimately, everything is going to flow from Kether or Kether. That's why it is the crown. Now, also what I want to remind you guys of is that for every Sephirot, there is a planetary correspondence. And so the planetary correspondence that corresponds to Kether or the crown is Pluto. And Pluto, why? So Pluto or Hades is linked to Kether because Pluto is the farthest, the deepest, the most hidden. It's the planet of transformation through destruction, total annihilation of the self to birth something new. And so Kether is that place before form, before ego, before everything. It's the center of all existence. All right. So now that we have the endless light flowing into Kether, the crown, it is now going to flow from there to the next Sephirot. And before I do that, I need to turn on the air conditioner. Hold on, let me turn on the AC here. All right, these lights get very hot. All right, so let's talk about this. Also, by the way, Kether is also, when we talk about it in terms of the psyche, will be associated with your higher self. Your higher self is associated with Kether. So let's continue here. Ein Sof Or, the endless light, gets manifest in Kether, and this light flows into Chokmah or Chokmah. So Chokmah or Chokmah means wisdom. But this kind of wisdom isn't the way that you would normally think of wisdom. What it basically means, some of these words can be a little confusing, right? So you can just, it's not wisdom in the way one typically thinks of wisdom. What it means is raw, creative force. It's a flash of insight, the bolt of inspiration. So it's the movement of will, a chaotic surge of raw energy, kind of like a lightning bolt, a bright flash. It's, and to be more specific, what it is undifferentiated information. It's pure data from the void. So this is very similar to when people experience like the bright white light of existence, where everything is just pure light and pure unity. That's essentially Chokmah. It's very close to being to Kether, but it's not quite. Chokmah is essentially the experience of divinity in an undifferentiated way. So it is information, it is experience, but in a way that's so unified that you can't make sense of it, basically, because it's just raw creative force and information. So the planetary correspondence that goes with Chokmah is Neptune. This is associated with Neptune or Dionysus. In Esoterica, Neptune and Dionysus are both associations for planetary correspondence. And that makes a lot of sense here because Neptune is about dissolving boundaries. Dionysus is about tearing down the walls of reason and letting wild inspiration pour through. Intoxicated experience, unrestrained energy, divine madness that births art, chaos, and creation. So this is not a realm of things nice and ordered or logical or rational. This is the dissolving of boundaries, pure, undifferentiated, raw, creative force. That's what Chokmah is. And if these so far seem kind of abstract, that's because we're talking about the very foundations of existence here. So what we're going to talk about next is that this energy flows from Chokmah to Binah or Binah. Binah or Binah is when, so first we had the energy going from Kether to Chokmah, and from Chokmah, the energy flows to Binah. So what happens is that the raw, chaotic, disorganized energy from Chokmah flows to Binah. And Binah means understanding. And Binah is all about, it's the complete opposite of Chokmah. Binah is about framework, structure, form. This is where the wild, creative surge of Chokmah gets processed and organized into a pattern that makes sense. All that jumbled information gets ordered into something that you can understand. That's why it's called understanding. It takes wisdom, which is like pure energy or pure information, and puts it in a form that makes sense, that can be understood. And Binah takes that flash of power and builds with it. It's the architect, the engineer, the container. It sets boundaries. So here in Binah, this is all about logic, order, and reason that allows energy to actually stabilize and form into something intelligible. While Chokmah is about expansion, Binah is about contraction. Where Chokmah pours forth, Binah collects. You can think of Binah as the chalice. So think of it like this. Think about Chokmah is like water. Binah would be like a cup or a chalice. And Chokmah pours into Binah that then gives form to that water. It becomes shaped, right? The water becomes shaped in the container of the cup. Binah collects that energy. And what you'll notice here is that we have energy that now has been given form. And this is where life is really going to be able to really take off here. Now, there's a couple interesting things to note before we talk any more about this, is that you'll notice now that with Chokmah and Binah, we have two poles. Two poles, two opposites. This is all about outpouring, energy, creative force. This is about receptivity. It takes in, it gives form, it gives structure, it gives orders, it gives order, it sets boundaries. Now, here's something that's really interesting, is that traditionally in Kabbalah, Chokmah is considered the great father, and Binah is considered the great mother. And what's interesting about Kabbalah is that the way one typically thinks of gender in our culture is sort of reversed. Because Binah is about logic and reason and order and receptivity. Typically in our culture, we would associate like logic and reason stereotypically with masculinity and other concepts like emotion and intuition, etc., with femininity. But the important thing to remember here is that in terms of gender, it's not literally about gender or sex at all. It's just a way of talking about different kinds of energy. All this is in us, so it doesn't matter what your gender is. It's not really actually about that. But I just want to, put that out there. Chokmah is usually considered the father. Binah is considered the mother. And another reason why this is because Chokmah gives the energy and Binah receives the energy. And so you can think of it as like, during sex, the ejaculation is the sperm going forth, and then it is received. And then in the womb, life is structured and ordered. So that's kind of how Kabbalists view this. As Chokmah is the father giving the energy, Binah is the mother receiving the energy, and she is the womb of the universe, giving that energy structure and form. All right. But always remember that this is not about literal gender or sex. It's just a way of describing energy. And we're going to talk about that later, where you don't even have to talk, you just talk about in terms of positive and negative or yin and yang or whatever. So we'll get into more of that, but just keep that in mind. For completeness' sake, I want to mention that. So the planetary correspondence that goes with Binah is Saturn. And the reason why Binah is associated with Saturn is because Saturn is the planet that represents boundaries, structures, time, and discipline. Saturn is all about setting limits. And so Binah is what takes energy and gives it structure, and Saturn, being the planet related to structure and boundary, is why it's associated with Binah. And once again, remember, this has nothing to do with the actual literal planets. It's all in your mind. So they're just symbols. Just like fire doesn't represent fire physically, it represents your willpower. The planets don't have anything to do with the hunks of rocks floating around in space. It's just a way to talk about aspects of the self and reality and existence. And so you can associate those planetary symbols with the different Severot on the tree of life. Okay, so as you can see, these first three here are very important. These first three, you first have the infinite light pouring forth. It enters Kether as divine will and potential and becomes raw energy in Chokmah. And then that energy is shaped into something that has form and structure by Binah. Now, these three Seferot are very important. They're called the supernal triad. And this is the metaphysical architecture of everything. Every thought, every flash of insight, all of it is essentially founded on these three supernals, known as the supernals. They're the hidden engine behind creation. And what we essentially want to do is learn how to align with that flow, because when we learn how to align with that flow, it's like plugging directly into the cosmic source code. All right. So after the supernal triad, Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, or Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, the divine current starts stepping down into levels that we can understand better. You'll notice that it was pretty abstract, but the supernals are pretty abstract because they're they're the foundations of reality essentially. And so you're getting to the idea of, just like pure potentiality, pure energy, and energy that's structured into form. Now after the supernals, we're going to get into some ideas that we can actually start to wrap our head around. Okay, it's going to take more of a concrete shape. But what I want you to notice, right? So we go to from Kether to Chokmah to Binah, and then we're going to go from Binah to Chesed. This is the fourth Severot. So this is number 4. This is Chesed or Hesed. So Hesed is the first Sephirot that's not of the supernals. But notice something. Notice there's this big empty space here. There's this big empty space right here. And so if you look, you'll see the supernals are kind of set apart from these lower 7. So within this area here, this is known as the abyss. And that's why these supernals are kind of difficult to grasp, because it's basically saying that they're of the divine realm, and this abyss separates our understanding basically from the divine realm. However, there is a way to cross the abyss, and we will talk about that in the next live stream, because it starts to get into a little more complicated, because there's what you might call a hidden sephira, which is da'at, or knowledge, which allows one to cross the abyss. But we're not going to get too deep into that today. I just wanted to let you know that's why there's a big gap there, because there's this abyss that separates the supernals from the rest, but there is a way to cross it, which we will talk about. But let's just continue exploring the rest of the tree. So the energy, the structured energy from Binah goes to Chesed. And you'll notice that the energy is taking different qualities as it flows down the tree of life. Pure potential to raw creative energy to structured energy. And then in Chesed, something's going to happen to that structured energy. So you see the energy gets more and more developed as we go down the tree. As it flows, it gets more and more developed. Chesed means mercy. And you'll notice it's right under Chokmah here. And this Chesed is where the combined energy of the first 3, the supernals, divine will, raw energy, and structured understanding, actually starts to be expressed. And so Chesed is all about expansion. Basically, Chesed goes, oh, I received this structured energy. I want to expand it. It's kind of like a spiritual Big Bang, where the singularity is the information, and then comes the expansion. So Chesed is all about expansion. But why is it called mercy? It's called mercy because think of expansion in terms of like giving. And I just want to emphasize again, remember, if some of this sounds vague or abstract, or like why does this matter? How does this apply to my life? How is this going to make a connection to my unconscious? Because we have to just give the very basic framework of the tree itself. Later, we will get even more specific to show how we can then use that framework as a tool. Right now, we're just understanding the pattern. We need to know the pattern before we can use the pattern and put it into use, okay? So Chesed is expansion, but you can think of it in terms of giving without limits. That's why it's called mercy, because it's about basically like empathy, care, love, abundance. But this isn't like romantic love. This is universal love, the kind that sees all beings as part of the unity of existence. It's like unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness. It's altruism, it's empathy, it's growth. It's just open arms. It's always giving. It's that universal love, love of others, empathy. So the main thing that one can understand about Chesed is its expansion, outpouring, giving, love, empathy. It's a giving outpouring of love and empathy. And the planet that is associated with Chesed is Jupiter. And why? Because Jupiter is all about expansion and benevolence and optimism. That's why it's associated with Jupiter. Jupiter is associated with expansion and growth. But here's the problem. And you may have thought of this yourself. If you just left this energy there, if that's just where the energy stayed, it wouldn't be a good thing. Because think about it. Chesed just wants to give and give and give and give until basically everything collapses. It needs something to balance it out. It needs a counterpart. And so that's why the energy goes from Chesed to Geburah. So Geburah or Geburah is called severity. Or sometimes it's called strength or judgment. And Geburah is the polar opposite of Chesed. Just like Binah is the polar opposite of Chokmah, Geburah is the polar opposite of Chesed. Chesed expands and expands, gives and gives and gives, and then gives that energy to Geburah. Where Chesed says yes, Geburah says no. Geburah or Geburah is how the universe sets limits. It takes the flowing compassion and growth and expansion of Chesed and is going to put in boundaries and limitations. So you see, do you see how it's similar to the relationship from Chokmah to Binah, where Chokmah was just creative force, Binah gives it structure? Now in these Severot, this same pattern is going to happen again and again, but in a more defined way. Chesed isn't just pure creative force, it's expansion and love and empathy and giving. And Geburah isn't just pure form, it's about justice, discipline, setting boundaries, restraint. It's sharp. It stands up against harm. It wants to destroy what is unjust. So this is where boundaries are formed. You could think of it like this. Geburah, so Chesed basically goes, eat all the cake you want. Geburah says, not too much. You're going to get sick if you eat too much cake. Let's put some limits on it. So these two are very important to have working together. Because you still need Chesed, because without balance, Geburah becomes cruelty. Geburah is considered in Qabalah to be like a very dangerous Severot. Because without balance, it becomes cruelty, it becomes violence, it becomes wrath, it becomes rigid control. It can lose empathy and turn into total oppression. So it's very powerful energy one has to be careful with. It's also associated with willpower, by the way. So you can see Geburah is it's willpower, it's strength, it's justice, it's limitations, it's boundaries, it sets laws in order. Where Chesed is about care and mercy, Geburah's law and order, strict adherence. But you need a balance. Because obviously you could see where one or the other can get out of hand. So the planet associated with Geburah is Mars. Because Mars is the warrior, the enforcer, the one who protects and defends. So Mars energy is associated with willpower, getting things done, and separation. So that's why it fits with Geburah. it creates that clarity. So now we have the energy going from Geburah to Tiferet or Tiferet or Tiferet. You can say Tiferet. It doesn't matter how you say any of this stuff. You can say anything you want. But it's Tiferet or Tiferet. And Tiferet or Tiferet means beauty. And this is where it all comes together. So you went from Chesed to Geburah, now to Tiferet. And you'll notice it's smack dab in the center of the tree of life. This is an incredibly important Sephirah. This is where everything comes together. It's the beating heart, right in the center of the tree of life. And why? This is the balancing point. If there was anything you'd associate with Tiferet, it would be balance. It's what synthesizes Chesed and Geburah. It's what creates that balance, making sure it's not too much of one or the other. That's why it sits in the center as well. You'll see how you have opposites on these different pillars, but in the center is sort of the balancing point. The center is where things come together, and you can see so many connections go to Tiferet. It's an incredibly important Sephirah. It takes the love and compassion of Chesed and the strength and discipline of Geburah and merges them into something higher, harmony. And Tiferet is also our center of our self-awareness. It's basically self-awareness. It's the center of your field of consciousness. So here's the interesting thing about Tiferet. Is it basically, if you're understanding this in like a Jungian framework, it's your ego. Your ego takes information in, makes choices, and balances things. But I want to make it clear, though, that sometimes in different esoteric books or resources, you're going to see Tiferet associated with your higher self. Why is that? This is because though Tiferet is the ego in the center of the field of consciousness, Kether is really your ultimate higher self. But look, they're connected. They're connected by the Kether goes right down to Tiferet. So this connection means that your truest self isn't separate for the divine. Tiferet is like a mirror for the light of divinity, but it only reflects clearly when things are in balance. So basically you can think of Tiferet as like consciousness, and consciousness can take on different levels. When it's connected to Kether in a very, very powerful way, then your higher self can start to manifest within consciousness. But basically, Tiferet is the center of your self-awareness. It's consciousness. And it's balancing everything. Not just the mercy and severity of Chesed and Geburah, but also thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition. All the functions meet here. It's the center of everything. This is the throne of the soul. And the planet that it's associated with, the classical planet it's associated with, is the sun. And the sun, this is the radiant center, the source of light, identity, and life. Tiferet is the part of you that shines because it's aligned with something greater. And by the way, I'm talking about all these different Sephirot in terms of when they're operating properly. There's obviously all this stuff can be misaligned and then problems can occur, but we're not quite getting into the realm we're talking about when problems happen. This is when everything is basically aligned as it should be. Anyways, just think of Tiferet as the harmonizer. It harmonizes and connects everything. It sits at the center, harmonizes and connects everything. That's what Tiferet does. It's the center of your field of consciousness. It's really not super. It's fairly simple. It can sound kind of complicated, but it's really not. It's pretty simple. So to sum it up here, we have Chesed that expands and gives. Divine love in motion expanding, Geburah restrains, sets boundaries, and protects its divine judgment and power. And then we have Tiferet, that balances them both. It's the centered self. All right. And together they create this moral, emotional, and spiritual engine of your soul. So after Tiferet, the light of creation keeps flowing downwards. And let's see where it goes now. So from Tiferet, it goes to Netzach, or Netzach, whatever you want to say, Netzach. So we have Netzach, which means victory. And this is another one where the word, like, why is it called victory? All right, so this isn't about like winning a victory in war, though it could be associated with that, but that's not what it's really talking about. Is overcoming inertia. Think about sitting on the couch and you're like, oh man, I should really get up and do the dishes. But you just want to sit on the couch and watch TV. But man, you should really get up and do the dishes. So guess what? You decide to get up and do the dishes. So you standing up to do the dishes, that's victory. It's Netzach. You have overcome the obstacle. You have see that's why the word victory is used. But basically what it really means is the emotional engine that pushes us forward. It's passion, it's drive, it's romance, it's art, it's beauty, it's pleasure. It's the part of you that wants. Netzach is what makes you fall in love. You might think, well, wasn't Chesed about love? Chesed was about love, but it's about empathy and universal love. Netzach is love in terms of like romantic love, passion, sexual energy. It makes you chase after things. It's desire is what it's. Netzach is desire and emotion, whether it's sexual, creative, or just the desire to feel alive or feel something. It's very powerful. It's the realm of desire and emotion. But the problem is that it can be unpredictable. Emotions can be unpredictable. But Netzach also has the ability for great leadership and inspiration. That's another reason why it's associated with victory. Great leadership and inspiration. But here's the thing. It doesn't lead and inspire through logic or reason, but through feeling. Think about like a charismatic artist or a poet or an activist in the street who's not really using logic, but rather trying to appeal to your emotion. Netzach moves people. It's not about like a spreadsheet and numbers and being like, okay, well, here are the facts. It's an inner fire that inspires. So that's what Netzach is all about. If you were going to put a word to Netzach, it would be emotion. But it's desire, it's drive, it's passion, it's all those associated things. And so associated with Netzach is Venus. Venus is, of course, the planet of love, beauty, and art. And it's really fitting for Netzach, which is emotion. So we have Venus associated with love and emotion, is why that it is associated with Netzach. So you might kind of get an idea of where this is starting to go, because the energy in Netzach now gets sent to Hod. Hod means glory or splendor. It's another one of those weird words that's like, why is it called that? Well, here's what it is. Where Netzach is emotion, Hod is intellect. So this is emotion and passion and desire. This is intellectual clarity, the realm of thought, language, logic, communication. And where Netzach is kind of like about expression, Hod is about analysis. Netzach, you could say, like paints a picture. Hod would explain color theory. Hod is where science exists, philosophy, occult knowledge, not in like an intuitional, not into like an intuition or mystical way, but basically structured systems of thought. Hod is what makes things make sense. It's the rational mind that says, okay, I might be feeling something, but let's really examine it. Let's test it. Let's name it. Let's categorize it. So you can see that Netzach, this volatile emotion, drives, and passion, gets sent over to Hod, which is about, okay, let's take that and order it logically. Do you see it's very similar to the previous relationships that we've been talking about, but it's always on a different level. This level here, yes, it's associated with logic and reason and intellect, but you'd be like, well, isn't that Binah? Well, yes, but Binah is like in the divine sense, in the structure and form of existence itself. Hod is like, I got a problem in my life. Let's think about how we're logically going to fix this. Let's use analysis in our, in a practical way, in a categorical way. So it's on a different level, but you can see how a lot of these are closely related, but in different ways. But you can see this pattern of like chaotic energy getting structured, and then it gets chaotic again and gets structured again. And it always has to be balanced, because without balanced, you have problems. And in Hod, this is where conscious thoughts really start to come into play here. But of course, if you had too much intellect, devoid of emotion, you'd be a robot. You'd be a robot. And by the way, remember, all of these structures are patterns within us. You'll notice, though, that lots of people aren't balanced. Most people are either one or the other. Most people are like, oh, all Netzach and no Hod, or all Hod or no Netzach. I mean, no one is that, but they much prefer one usually. There's that emotional artist who doesn't know anything about philosophy or mathematics. And then you have the kind of like that dry scientist that's all working all the time, but barely expresses themselves. I'm using stereotypes here, but just to get a point across. But the point of the tree of life is to say, it's all in you. You need to activate them all and balance them all to make that energy flow the way it needs to. Why? So ultimately you can create the life that you want, which is what we're going to get to. But so Hod is the domain of Mercury. And that makes sense, because Mercury is the god of communication, intellect, and a messenger. Quick, clever, and sharp. So we have this interaction here. Hod is what grounds Netzach. Hod is what grounds Netzach. But Hod also needs Netzach, or else it wouldn't really be alive. It would be lifeless data, again, like a robotic sort of existence. So we're moving on now to Yesod. So the energy gets sent to Yesod, and you'll see these central Sephira are you'll see that these polarized pairs are interacting. They're very opposite. The center is where things come together. We saw it came together in balance. Yesod is known as the foundation. Again, it's in the middle. And basically, this is where all the energy from Netzach and Hod and Tiferet converges. Because you can see it's connected to Tiferet, it's connected to Hod, it's connected to Netzach. But here's the thing. Remember, all the energy is getting, passed from Sephira to Sephira. But it all culminates in Yesod. So what you can think of Yesod as is where everything, all of that is collected and converges into. What this is, in terms of psychology, is your personal unconscious. It's the dream realm, the imagination, the inner world that's behind the scenes that influences everything. It's not like physical or manifestation, but it's what comes right before it. It's the divine, it's the blueprint. We've had all the energy go through all these different phases, and it's collected in Yesod as a blueprint. Everything has to pass through this before becoming real. But Yesod is the personal unconscious. It's and you'll notice that these central Severot are very much to do with your consciousness. They're all of it is your consciousness, but the center is where it comes together. So we saw in Tiferet, that's the center of your field of consciousness. Kether is basically your higher self. Yesod is your personal unconscious, your dreams. It's intuition. That's where your intuition is tied as well. It's where instinct is as well. Also, sexuality and emotion, but different than Netzach, it's the kind that's in your unconscious mind. This is where your shadow self is. So Yesod can contain all that repressed content, stuff that's behind. Netzach is more like, oh, I'm in love and I know that I'm in love, or I'm attracted to this person and I know I'm attracted to this person. Yesod is more like, I have these unconscious drives that I haven't consciously recognized, and they're controlling my life. So Yesod is associated with the moon. And of course, as always, this makes a lot of sense. The moon is mysterious, and it's tied to dreams, intuition, and the unconscious mind. This is basically where all your inner programming lives. Everything has been collected into Yesod. And so you need to be able to, when we talk about like connecting to the unconscious, that's where, in terms of the personal unconscious, that's where Yesod comes in. Now, finally, we have from Yesod to Malkuth, and Malkuth means kingdom. This is the bottom of the tree, and it's called the fruit of the tree of life. Why? Because this is the final result. Malkuth is incredibly important. This is where everything comes to fruition. If you think of in terms of like an AI, it's the output. So if you ask AI to make a picture for you, hey, I want you to draw my cat as a human. You give that command to AI, and it goes through all these different processes, and then the output is the picture. But there's a lot of hidden layers, a lot of stuff happened behind the scenes that you didn't see to get to that. Malkuth is the output. Malkuth is the result of everything else. It's the fruit. And if we are talking in, because remember, the tree of life can symbolically represent the structure of reality or the structure of your soul or mind. So Malkuth, in terms of the structure of physical reality, or I should say reality, Malkuth would represent the physical world, nature and matter, space-time. But if we're talking about psychology and how it maps to your soul, it's not necessarily the physical world, it's the world of action. It's where ideas become action, where your feelings becomes behavior, where thoughts become something that you actually do. In the psyche, it's the moment that you actually put something into action and do something. We'll talk later about how this is in terms of the psyche, but you can have like a flash of inspiration in Kether that goes to Chokmah and gets structured in Binah, and it goes through all, it gets developed until you actually do the thing. So Malkuth is action. It's your habits, the results. It's essentially that what you see, and this is why this is important for manifestation, because Malkuth is what you do, and it's why your life is the way it is. Because it's the result of your inner architecture. And Malkuth is the result of this. It's where the blueprint gets through. So Yesod is like the blueprint. Malkuth is the thing built or being built or taking action to build it. But it's the lowest on the tree, but it's kind of the most important. It's that output. It's the result. It's where the divine energy finally manifests. And so when your kingdom, when your world, when your life is in a shitty state, it's because the various Severot are not in harmony. They're not balanced correctly. It's like the AI producing a hand with 20 fingers. Something went wrong somewhere. So you're having a shitty life because something isn't organized in some way. Something's out of whack. Something's out of balance. And we can use this to figure out what it is and fix that. Now, of course, there's always exceptions to this. If we live in a shitty capitalistic world that puts a lot of constraints on people. And there are some of us that just find ourselves in a shitty situation that we can't help. We can always make a situation better. But I just want to point that out. There are some times that, unfortunately, we live in a shitty world. But in terms of in terms of making one's life better, it's organizing this internal structure so that the fruit, which is your kingdom, which is your life, which is your world, becomes the way that you want it to be. So what planet is Malkuth associated with? It's associated with Earth, like the Earth, or the four elements, which is fire, water, earth, and air. This is off screen. You can't see that, can you? There. Maybe you can kind of see him there. So Malkuth is associated with the four elements. And as we know, fire is will and motivation. Water, oh, that's not fire. Where's fire? Fire is your will and desire and drive and motivation. Water is emotion, empathy, intuition. Air is your thoughts, your communication, your intellect. Earth is structure, discipline, and groundedness. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, aren't a lot of those in other aspects of the tree? Yes. All the elements exist as expressed throughout the entire tree. The four elements are expressed in some way throughout the whole tree. The difference is that in Malkuth is where they become behavior. It's those things in action. It's the part of the psyche that turns those internal energies into actual decisions, actual patterns, actual results. All right. So it's where the inner becomes the inner, where the psyche becomes real. So that's the difference, is that often in systems that show the four elements here, the elements will also be in not very vibrant colors, because it's to show that it's expressed in a different way. The four elements are throughout the whole tree, but specifically in Malkuth is how the elements are used to express behavior. Because remember, Malkuth contains everything. Everything, this whole process passed divine energy into Malkuth. So Malkuth has everything, but just in a very specific way, a very physical way, a very action-oriented way. So Malkuth is the sphere of action and, the four elements, because these all drive your actions. So that's what Malkuth is associated with. So let me put these over here. This is a broad definition and understanding of the tree of life and their planetary associations and elemental associations, remembering that, of course, the tree of life or the planets are symbolic. It's not literally the planets. It's just symbolic ways to understand the tree of life better using different symbols. We use different symbols because for different people, different things click, and we're trying to communicate with the unconscious mind, and the unconscious mind communicates through symbol. So there's a couple more things that we need to look at here, though, with the tree of life. And just is kind of, let's see here. Should we get this out of the way? Well, no, I guess we could leave that here. All right. So now that we understand the various Severot, there's something I want to point out here. And that is, when you look at the tree, it's not just a bunch of spheres floating around. They're organized into columns. Now, they're organized into 3 columns. These 3 columns are called the 3 pillars. And I'm going to have to, let me see how I can see. Let me just move this closer so that I can do some writing here. Okay, so this pillar here is known as the pillar of mercy. This pillar here is known as the pillar of severity. And then the central pillar is sometimes just called the middle pillar, but it's also called the pillar of mildness or the pillar of balance. So each of these 3 pillars represents a kind of energy or mode of consciousness. So let's start with this right, the pillar on the right. So this includes Chokmah, Chesed, and Netzach. You'll notice this is these are very much related to each other. These are all about active energy, active force, expansion, raw creative energy, expanding love, driving desire, passion, emotion. This has also been called the pillar of force. It pushes outwards, it creates, it grows, it gives. It's associated with movement, passion, love, empathy, giving without limit. It's eros, it's heart. It's to create, to inspire. And you'll notice that this right pillar aligns with the right hemisphere of the brain, the part that's creative, artistic, emotional. So the right pillar aligns with the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, on the left, we have the pillar of severity with Binah, Geburah, and Hod. And you'll notice these are also very similar. The formal, structured aspect of reality, justice, boundaries, limitations, discipline, intellect, categorizing ideas, conceptual analysis. So this is the pillar of severity. And like this is known as, has been known as the pillar of force, this is known as the pillar of form. And so it's a force, opposite of this, it's a force of contraction. It pulls inwards or receives. This pillar is all about, the one on the right is all about expansion and growth. The left is the opposite. It takes in and takes that energy, limits, defines, restrains structure, form, logic, boundaries. And it aligns with the left hemisphere of the brain, which deals with language, structure, and analysis. It's a necessary counterbalance to growth. This has Binah, which brings structure to raw energy, Geburah, which applies discipline and justice to total expansion, and Hod, which uses reason and logic to clarify and organize things. Where this pillar says, let's grow, this pillar says, okay, but let's make sure that we're stable here. We need some stability. We need some rules. The right is creative. The left is more defining. This is where like even responsibility comes in. Now we have the central pillar or the middle pillar, and it's been called the pillar of mildness or the pillar of equilibrium. And it runs right down the center with Kether, Tiferet, Yesod, and Malkuth. And this pillar isn't just about giving or restricting. It's the balance between everything. It's the point where opposites meet and harmonize, where love and judgment gets harmonized into justice, but in a compassionate way. And logic and emotion gets expressed as ideas that are caring. It's just where everything is synthesized together as opposites. So if the right pillar is eros and desire, and the left is logos and reason, then the middle is the result. It's synthesis. It's consciousness. It's selfhood. It's it represents the whole. The middle pillar is the important aspect. I mean, all of them are important, but this is where everything gets structured together. Now there's something I really want to point out here. That's interesting. So I mentioned earlier that Chokmah is like the father, and Binah is the mother. Well, here's the interesting thing. In a lot of Kabbalistic frameworks, traditionally, this right pillar is considered masculine, and the left pillar is considered feminine, and the center pillar is considered androgynous. And you'll see this completely flips how we think of gender in our culture, because this is all about love, eros, compassion, giving, care, emotion, and that's associated with the masculine pillar. And here we have logic, understanding, severity, judgment, restriction, justice, reason, logic, and it's considered feminine. Once again, that's because in Qabalah, what is masculine is an outwards force. What is feminine is a receptive form, a structuring, a womb. The masculine gives the energy, the feminine structures the energy, and when it's balanced, it results in androgynous synthesis. But the thing is I'm just kind of telling you this for completeness' sake. I don't often think about it in these terms because I think it's confusing, and it confuses a lot of people, because this is not about literal gender. And people confuse that all the time and try and justify their hateful, misogynistic, or homophobic, or transphobic, or just bullshit views with stuff like this. Which is dumb, because there's an androgynous pillar right in the center, even if they were trying. Anyway, it's just people have been using it in a way that's twisted. But just like fire doesn't actually have anything to do with actual fire, and Mars isn't literally the planet Mars, masculine and feminine aren't literally about gender. It's about polarized forces. So they're symbolic terms for energetic qualities. So what we can do is not even refer to them. I mean, you can if you want to, but I often won't. And what we can do is there's many different ways. You could just refer to this as the pillar of force and the pillar of form, or even positive energy, negative energy, and neutral energy. And negative and positive doesn't mean in the sense of like good or bad, just opposite charges. Think about like electricity or magnetism, the tension between opposites that creates movement. So we could think of it in terms of positive, negative, and neutrality in just energetic terms, because this is all a spectrum here. These are poles on a spectrum. Think of a battery, poles on a spectrum. We could also, what I like to do as well is think of this pillar as eros. Eros is feeling, flow, love, desire, passion. That's eros. And logos. And logos is reason, order, law, intellect, analysis. And then the middle is synthesis, where it brings everything into harmony. So for me personally, that's how I usually work with it. I think of this as the pillar of eros, the pillar of logos, and the pillar of synthesis. But there's many different options. You can think of it in terms of positive and negative and neutral, or masculine, feminine, and androgynous. It's totally up to you, whatever resonates with you. Just if you do choose to think of it in terms of gender, remember that it's not actually about gender, because that can cause a lot of problems. All of these are energies within you, just expressed in polarized form, that need to be synthesized for the optimal results. Each pillar is necessary. You can't just live in love and expansion forever. That would turn into chaos. You can't live in structure and logic alone. That would become so restrictive, it would become death. You would basically be like strangling yourself with you're so restrictive. The real power comes in balance. The harmony between chaos and order, passion and discipline, all of that is harmonized in the central pillar. So the idea here is when you're looking at the tree of life, you're not just looking at spiritual symbols. This is a map of polarity that exists within you. And it's a way to understand forces that are in you and how to bring them into harmony. So again, very broad. Remember, if you're thinking this is still a little like general, that's because we're just learning the general pattern so that we can then use it as a template to actually work with it. But we have to know what it is first. And understanding this general pattern is what is going to allow us to go into more detail later. Now, there's one final concept that I want to discuss with you. And that is, in addition to these pillars, there are pairs. Okay. So notice this pair here of Netzach and Hod. So this pair of Netzach and Hod is the pair of action, because they're basically the engine room of your personality. Netzach is your emotional drive, your passion, your creativity, your love, even lust. It says, I want this, I feel this, I need to do this. And Hod is your intellect, your structure, your logic, your language, your planning and communication. It basically says, okay, how exactly are we going to do this? Netzach is your drive to do it. Hod says, okay, how are we practically going to do this thing? And together, they're your actions. So this pair is the pair of action. Now, if we take a look at the pair up here, there's another pair with Chesed and Geburah. So when we take a look at this pair here, this is the ethical pair. And basically it has to do with the moral compass. Chesed is about love, empathy. It's about forgiveness, loving unconditionally. Where Geburah is about justice and restraint. It says, okay, but with boundaries, with consequences, we need justice. So this is the ethical pair. It creates our sense of right and wrong, but we need to balance care with justice. So Carol Gilligan basically critiqued our current system of law by saying it focuses on too much justice and no care. In other words, we need to like stop thinking of things of like people as problems to calculate or like equations to solve, and realize that there's actually humans being affected here, and we need to take cases on a case-by-case basis. But we need both. We can't just have all empathy and forgiveness and care and no justice at all, or else that'd be a problem. We need, so there's this balance. So this is the ethical sphere. We see this manifest in like our justice system, which is not very good right now, because right now our justice system is almost, it's primarily Geburah. It's out of balance. Our justice system is Geburah, very little Chesed. And it's out of balance, which is why we have a lot of the horrendous injustices that take place in our world. So Chesed is the compassion that feels for others. Geburah sets limitations, but we can think of it on a personal level as well. So think of it in terms of, you can also think of it in terms of like self-care and discipline. Chesed is about, taking some time to relax, take a vacation, eat some cake, take a vacation, have some dessert. But Geburah is discipline and boundaries. And they say, okay, have some cake, but don't eat the whole thing. Just have, a few bites, and take a vacation, but just a week. But you need both. If you're all discipline, you're going to get burnout. You're not going to be able to be doing your work optimally. Your life's going to suffer. And then a chesed will just turn into you sitting around and enjoying life and never getting anything done. So you can think of it in terms of that. You can think of it in terms of so many different things, like even like dieting. Geburah sets the calorie limit. Chesed is your cheat days. So then we have, this is the pair of action. This is the pair of ethics. And then this, because remember, man, there's this big abyss here, because these are always special. This is the divine pair. And so this is about how we relate to the eternal, to the infinite, but from very different perspectives. Chokmah is direct experience of the infinite, raw, unfiltered. Basically how you experience things before your mind starts putting it into boxes. It's phenomenological experience. It's basically like how you experience things in altered states of, how you experience divinity in altered states of consciousness. Void states, meditation, psychedelics. Remember, don't do anything dangerous or illegal. You don't have to do those things. But that's one example. It's being flooded with the experience of divinity, not reducing it to words or categories. It's experience of divinity. Binah is structure, reason, logic. It's how we make sense of the divine in a logical way. You'll see that in a lot of my work, like in meta-rationalism and neogenesis. A lot of my neogenian books have a lot of binah. Not because Chokmah is not important. I emphasize that Chokmah is important. But in certain books just concentrate on different aspects. And Binah is the understanding of reality rationally. So this is like high level philosophy, mathematics, metaphysics, understanding the mathematical structure of reality in terms of Fourier transforms and sinusoidal waves and interference patterns, and having a very, putting the infinite into a structure that can be understood in an intelligible way. So this is essentially the idea that Chokmah is encountering the mystery. Binah is organizing it into something that can be understood. Now, both, of course, are vital, because Chokmah without Binah is completely incoherent, like a crazy psychedelic trip that you just have no idea what the heck is going on, and it just seems like total crazy chaos. You can't explain it. Well, Binah is going to help you understand it. So Binah gives order and structure to things. It's the integration after the experience. The thing that most people skip. Most people skip Binah. Poor Binah. Binah gets skipped all the time. People just want the fun experience. They don't want the understanding or the integration. But Binah without Chokmah is also bad. It becomes dry, empty frameworks without any real life behind it. And that can be very dangerous, because then it's just like empty structure with no content. And that can be very, very problematic, especially when we are like trying to build a new world and a new society. We need to understand what it is like to live in a world, not just put in a bunch of structures in it without understanding the lived experience of it. So this is about experiencing the eternal. This is about making logical and rational sense of the eternal. So to recap, we have Netzach and Hod as the action pair, emotion and intellect driving how we behave. Chesed and Geburah, the ethical pair, love and justice shaping how we care for others and our ideas and concepts of justice and care, and self-discipline as well, and self-care as well. And then Chokmah and Binah is the divine pair, raw experience versus reason guiding how we understand the eternal. And so these are, again, all within you. So we looked at a lot, all right? We looked at Ein Sof, Ein Sof Or. We looked at how the limitless light flows into Kether and goes through all the different Severot until it finally results in Malkuth. We looked at the different pillars and what this is all about. We looked at the planetary associations. What this is about is understanding that this is a pattern that's in you. Now that we understand the very broad general idea of the pattern, we can start to get more detailed and see how to order this stuff, how to actually make sense of it in our lives, because we need to understand how it works before we can start working with it. And just you understanding these ideas are going to help wake up these forces that are unconscious. You're bringing these unconscious forces into consciousness just by understanding this. Just by understanding this, you're thinking about concepts that maybe you haven't thought about before and realizing that certain things exist within you that you weren't aware of before. So you're already becoming more aware of the structure of your psyche. So, but remember, this is a practical tool. The way your psyche is actually structured is immensely complex, but this is a simple tool. It's simple. It can be complex, but in terms of how your psyche is actually structured, it's fairly simple, so that you can actually make that communication and forge that connection. Remember, this is psychological technology here. And this psychological technology is what's going to allow you to make that connection. So there's one further concept that we need to discuss that we didn't discuss today. And that is this central area here known as the abyss. And within the abyss, there is a hidden sephira known as da'at, which is knowledge. And that's an extremely important one, which is going to allow us to, because right now there's this big gulf between the lower Sephirot and divinity. But da'at is what's going to allow us to cross the abyss and access divinity. But there's the danger of falling into the abyss, which is not a good thing. You don't want to do. But we'll be talking about that next time. And then once we have these concepts in mind, we'll start to even go further and further, make it more detailed, and eventually begin to realize how to work with it in a practical way. So I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. I know that that's a lot to take in, but as always, tell me in the comments what you like. If you need some concepts explained more, if there are certain areas that you'd like me to cover, we're going to cover a lot. So I have a lot planned. Keep that in mind. Also, make sure you check out my books. If you enjoy what we talk about here, I highly recommend Psychogenesis, Self and Universal Transformation. This is about actualizing your higher self, reaching hyper awareness and manifesting your will through will forming. It's not in the language of symbolism. This is Binah. This is through logical, ordered understanding. So this is very much Binah energy. So don't be expecting alchemical or Kabbalistic symbols in this, but it's in terms of logic and reason and psychology. But it's the same topic, just approached from a different way. Check out as well my Spotify channel. It's links in the description. You can follow me on Spotify and become a member. We're having a members only video called the dark truth about faith about God. That's going to be good. It helps out a lot when you become a member, and I appreciate it very much. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Dallas, Sacred Moth, Mario, Vanoli, Celsus, Irresistible, Chris Magistus, and TDFD, and everyone else. Thank you very much.